From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Today we are talking about the film. I'm really excited about this film, Big George Foreman. It's going to be in theaters April 28th. I've seen it. It's amazing. I love it. And I am honored to have from his bed by the beach, the head of Sony Affirm TV and films, Rich Peluso. Rich, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Rick. And I can say it. This is my favorite interview so far. I mean, how often do you get to recline and do an interview? It's great.
So you're at the beach. You're at the beach right now with your family, huh?
I am in Okaloosa Island, which is in the panhandle of Florida.
Yes, I love that. Yes.
And funny enough, 2 nights ago, I went to pick up some food for my family at Five Guys in Fort Walton Beach, and I ran into none other than Alex Kendrick.
in Fort Walton?
Yeah, he's with his family on vacation, and we happened to run into each other in the same restaurant.
Oh, that's funny. That's great. Excellent. Excellent. Well, yes, while you're reclining and enjoying yourself right now, we're going to do our interview. This is great that we can do this.
Wonderful.
And we're talking about the movie Big George Foreman. Talk to me. I saw it. I brought my sweet mother to see it, and sitting next to me was you with your father. That was amazing.
Right. That's right. Yeah, my mom. Actually, my mom couldn't go. My father went. Of course, my wife, a couple of daughters, my sister, and two of her 4 sons. So it was quite a family outing to let them experience the movie for the first time. It was great.
It was, and the film was. You know, it's interesting. The quality level of Christian films is just shooting up. So people who like Jesus Revolution and looking for movies of that caliber, you're going to get that with Big George Foreman. This thing is made well. It is big Hollywood movie all over, and with a great faith-based message. Talk to me about how this movie came your way.
Sure. Well, it is the second time that a movie has kind of had its origin based in me running into a friend at a coffee shop. So I was years ago, I think it was like 2015 or 16. I ran into a friend at a coffee shop not too far from my house. We started chatting. He asked me what we were up to, and I told him about, Affirm Films. He knew me from my previous life in the music business, and he just wanted to know what I was doing, now. And I told him, and I said, our focus on true story and people of faith who have, have intersected with God in their life. And he said, "Hey, have you ever heard about George Foreman's story?" And I didn't really know it. And I ended up getting a book, God in My Corner, and read it, was fascinated with it, and called this guy up and said, "Hey, I love this story. Thank you so much for, turning me on to it." And I said, "You wouldn't happen to know anybody in the camp over there at the Foreman family?" And he did. He knew one of George Foreman's sons, George the Fourth, which his nickname is Big Wheel, and he gave me his the cell phone number, and I texted him, George Foreman's son, and told him who I was, and I wanted to meet George and find out if he was open to having his story told on the big screen. And I got a text back maybe the next day asking me, "Well, my father wants to know what movies have you done." So I listed out, War Room and Soul Surfer and Courageous and Courageous. And he texted me back within an hour and said, "Okay, my dad will meet you." So I flew to Houston about 2 days later and sat in George Foreman's living room for a few hours and asked him a bunch of questions. And by the end of the meeting, he agreed to give us the rights to tell his story with one big provision, and that is that we not focus on the just the boxing story, but we really lay out his faith journey and his radical encounter with Jesus Christ and salvation. And I said, "Look, George, you're talking to the right guy." So, we started a 7-year journey to finally get this movie on the big screen. It's been a long time, but we're really excited.
7 years. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we had to work out the arrangement for his rights, and we had to meet with writers, and, we had a first writer write it, and it wasn't quite what we needed. We brought a couple more writers on, and then George read it and had a lot of notes, and we continued on this journey while also talking to potential directors and bringing a producer on. And, those things, any one moment you feel like you're making progress, but then like years can go by. It's,
Yeah.
First of all, it's a miracle that any movie gets made. And secondly, it is not uncommon from the origin of an idea to the movie hitting screens of it being anywhere from, 5 to 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And, unless of course, you're making the next Marvel movie and it's, there's just a machine, they're just pumping them out. But you know what I mean? Like original stories take a long time.
So all that from meeting someone at coffee.
Yep. Yeah.
So I'm working on a follow-up to Show Me the Father for women, kind of a type of movie for women. Do you want to meet for coffee when you get back in town?
Yeah. That's where it all happens, apparently.
Let's go to coffee, Rich.
Yeah. That's how I did the Soul Surfer movie. I ran into a friend at a coffee shop and who happened to know Bethany's manager. It's amazing. So, I do. Whenever I stop by a coffee shop, I think, well, this could be the next movie, beginning of the next movie.
So, how much of this did George did you go through with George, and what did he think of the film, and what was that relationship like working with George on this?
Well, it was wonderful, and it's really hard, I think, and potentially very uncomfortable for anyone that's having a movie made about their life. And because, there's an understanding that there needs to be creative license to take decades of someone's life and put it into a 90-minute movie or a 2-hour movie. But there's also the preciousness of the family and the events in his life that are hard to hand over to people and have them dramatize it in a way that, that can be very personal and painful. But he was a pleasure to work with. He had a lot of notes on the early drafts of the script. He wasn't really pleased with the direction we were going in a couple of occasions. And we took that very seriously, because we know that when we do a story of someone's life, we're just making a movie and we move on to the next movie, but they have to live with that the rest of their lives, right? And so we take it very seriously, and we took all of his concerns to heart, and we got to a point where he loved the script. And on December 14th, I think I flew out to Houston and I showed it to him and about 12 members of his family, and he cried and he laughed and he said, "I absolutely love it. I could watch it 1,000 more times," which was awesome to hear him say.
Yeah. Well, it is a rewatcher. There's a lot in it that I would want to. It's like I saw it with my mom, but I want to see it again. I'm going to go see it when it comes in theaters, just because I want to see it again. I'm going to take my wife. I'm going to take some other people. It's really good. You did a great job putting this thing together.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, our director, George Tillman, our producer, David Zelon, they're artists and perfectionists, and they work really hard to put together something that's a great experience.
So, talk for people who might not know, that they might know George Foreman as the guy who made the grill. Talk a little bit, just some of the listeners, so they might know a little bit about George's story.
Sure. Well, George grew up very poor and very hungry, and hunger can do things to people. They can hurt them psychologically, can make them angry, can make them withdrawn, can make them desperate. And George certainly fell into the angry camp. And he was just a frustrated, angry, violent young kid that was very big for his size. At one point, as a young man, he was mugging people, for money, and he ended up getting caught by the police. Well, he was pursued by the police, and he hid in a home and covered himself underneath a home in a crawl space and covered himself with a leaky sewage pipe with human, filth, and to hide from the dogs that the police had. And he avoided arrest, but it really did something to him. And he thought, there has got to be a better way to live my life. And he ended up at 17 joining the Job Corps and almost getting thrown out there because of fighting. And got a chance to stay if he got into the boxing program there at the Job Corps. And that kind of birthed his journey to boxing. And a year later, he won the gold medal, at 19. He had just turned 19. And, it set him on this path. And this path really was about him seeking the world, at the expense of his soul. It was about violence. It was about respect. It was about getting respect. It was about getting money and wealth and homes and cars. And when he reached the zenith of his career, as a young boxer, he just basically woke up one day after he had cheated on his wife, lost his family. He realized that he had everything in the world and he had nothing. And he ended up with this very radical, experience with God, a radical salvation, an encounter with Jesus Christ that really changed the trajectory of his life, becoming a pastor and changing lives around him and reconciling with his family. It's a beautiful story of what God can do with a broken person and in turning their life around.
And then he came back and made a play for the title again in his 40s. Is that right?
Yeah, he was 45 years old, and no one thought he had a shot, and he ended up becoming the world champion for the heavyweight world champion for the second time at 45 years old.
What a story! I mean, it's if it wasn't true, you would kind of go, "What?" It's that's a Hollywood thing, but it's not. It's all true. And so you're sitting in a coffee shop 7 years ago. Was it 7 years ago? Is it how long? The coffee shop?
Yeah, I think it was either. I'm thinking it was right after War Room came out. So it was probably like in November, December of 2015 is my best guess.
So you're 8 years ago, 7.5 years ago, you're sitting in a coffee shop. And then a few weeks ago, you're sitting in a theater with your family, your dad and your wife and your kids, and you're watching this movie that came about because you read a book and you said, I think I want to make this film. Talk to me about what that emotion feels like. Because most people aren't the head of a movie studio, right? Most people just can't say, that makes a great idea. I think I'll make a film,
Right.
And then do it, and then actually do it and have the resources. All you got to do is say, let's do it. And it's done. Most people can't do that. What was that feeling like for you sitting in that theater, watching that movie, knowing this was something that came to me? I read a book and now here we are watching it with my family.
Yeah, it's very thrilling. It is surreal. I don't feel I deserve or have earned or belong in this space, but this is where God has me. And I take it with, I take it with a lot of weight, and I understand the responsibility in pursuing certain stories. And so I do my best to, look for stories that are transformative, that honor God, that show Him intersecting in the lives of people, showing the kind of the journey and the changes that can happen in lives, and then the further impact that those changes have on other lives around them. And so, it's a constant process of looking for these stories. And look, I find, 500, and maybe there's one, that gets to this point, if that many. And when it does happen, as it did on this movie, as it did on Soul Surfer, as it did on When the Game Stands Tall, or many other stories, it's incredibly rewarding and satisfying. I really enjoy this part of it. It's so much work to just get to this moment, and then the moment happens so quickly.
What are your hopes for the movie?
Well, I hope that it a lot of comparisons to Soul Surfer, because we're now, what, 12 years after that movie came out, and it's still, when it plays on Netflix, it's a top 5 movie, and new kids and new moms and new little girls are experiencing that movie. So one of my hopes is that this movie has a very long life out in the culture, and people experience it, and and look at the life application elements of the story and how it can impact their lives and the people around them. And of course, we want it to be entertaining first. And what I love is when you see this movie, maybe when you saw it that Tuesday night, I think it was, um, there's a great emotional experience. It's a roller coaster of emotion. There's joy and concern and laughter and pain, and it's a great experience. But afterwards, what I really value is, what is the residue of that story left in people's minds and their hearts, and how does that, as kind of like a chemical agent, impact them? And so my hope is that George Foreman does that it has an impact on people's hearts and minds.
You talk about something that's transformative and that honors God, and how that faith intersects with how we live our lives. Those kinds of films do have legs. They do have the long tail. They go
Yeah.
they go because it's not just about a style or a look, but there's a truth that's deeper than what's happening currently in the culture. It's a truth that we all that can be relevant for all time. And so this movie certainly has that. Talk about the team. You were talking about the director and the people. You had to put a team together, and it took a while to get to that point. Talk about the importance of finding the right team to make a film like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had talked to several directors. Oh, first off, I wanted to bring David Zelon in to produce, because I brought him on Soul Surfer and When the Game Stands Tall, two big sports dramas for us. I also brought him in on a movie called Paul, Apostle of Christ, mainly for he's very experienced, very accomplished physical production, guy. And with this movie, I thought, well, David Zelon is the right guy, because he can help me pull together a great team to bring the story to life. We started talking to directors, and we met with George Tillman Jr. He had directed Men of Honor, which was a phenomenal movie with Cuba Gooding Jr. and now the name escapes me, Robert De Niro. His most recent film, I think, before this, was The Hate You Give. And George Tillman he read the existing draft, and he was just overwhelmed with the power of the story, and gave us his take on how to lay it out. And it was far beyond, any of the other meetings that we had had. So that felt like the right guy. And the wonderful culmination of that was, beyond, actually getting the movie in front of George Foreman, and having him love it. But the real culmination of that journey in finding the right director was bringing George Tillman Jr. together with George Foreman around a table next to my office in LA, and introducing them to each other. And George Tillman Jr. had a binder with all of his ideas for the movie. And we went through the whole presentation to George Foreman, and he loved it. And at the end of the meeting, George Tillman turned to the last page of his binder and pulled out a letter that his mom had written him some 20 plus years ago, that said that her prayer was that, George Tillman use his gifts in visual storytelling, to make great movies, but that one day he'll find a story that will glorify God and impact, change people's hearts. And that she prayed that someday he would find that right movie and direct it. And George Tillman handed that letter to George Foreman. George Foreman read it, and George Tillman said, "I believe this is the movie that my mom was praying for." So that was a very powerful experience, just to kind of watch that happen.
How important are faith-based messages now in our culture today, in your opinion? And how important is it that it's Christian? You know, we can talk about generic God, and God can be so many different things to so many different people. But you know, I just like to get your feedback on that in our culture, and kind of like what it is you're looking for when you make films at Sony Affirm.
Well, first off, I mean, I think God is everywhere. He is within our culture. He's, I'm sure disgusted by huge pieces of it, but he's there, and you can find him. You can find the good and the beautiful things sprinkled all over the place. It doesn't have to be, a quote unquote labeled faith based movie or story. People often ask me, what is my favorite Christian movie or faith based movie? And my response is, really one of my favorites ever is Les Mis. Because the grace of God shines so clearly through that movie. And so I find TV shows, I find movies, I find things where these beautiful concepts of the way God intends for us to love others and to honor others and to honor Him are evident, in a lot of different places. And so it's great to have all those pieces out there. But what I love about purposeful, you know, faith-based films that really work hard to be both entertaining and deliver, these life-changing messages and themes is I believe that if they're well done, if they're well produced, if they have great performances, you have the ability to kind of climb out of get over the hedge of the little kind of garden that we're in and have something that can reach people that are unchurched and outside of our faith. And, I love those kinds of stories. I love other stories that are more overt too, because, I love what Alex Kendrick has said when he's been asked, hey, are you concerned that mostly Christians watch these movies? And his response is, the church is thick. The church is hurting. And so I believe there's hurting people everywhere, and visual film entertainment is a great tool, to illustrate and illuminate God's truth. There's a reason why Jesus' disciples, came up to Jesus and said, "Why do you tell stories?" Jesus told stories because they are identifiable, they are illustrative, they pierce the defenses we have when someone's preaching at us or instructing us. Our hearts open up and we hear these things that really paint a beautiful picture of the kingdom of God. And so I think they're very important tools in an overall arsenal and, building the kingdom.
How did you transition into films? Because didn't you come from the music world?
I did. I spent 15 years at EMI Christian Music Group, working with wonderful artists like Stephen Curtis Chapman and Switchfoot and DC Talk and Chris Tomlin and these incredible artists. And what I loved about that is that, they were storytellers as well. They just had a very short book to lay their story out in, about 3 minutes of a song. So to me, the piece of the storytelling is very transferable, from music into long form story, whether that be TV series or film. But what had happened was, I spent 15 years in that music space, and this very important, groundbreaking movie came out that changed everything for me. And that movie was High School Musical. And the reason that changed everything to me is because I had 4 daughters. And I grew up with music. Music was such an important part of my life. I delved into the artist and the album and their library and their archives. And before my kids, this new generation, music was nothing more than a soundtrack to their lives. It's what they listened to while they were on their computer or doing their homework, and they weren't massive fans of artists. They were a fan of a song for a heartbeat. But what happened with them when they saw a story, that was really uplifting and fun and, aimed at them. They were intrigued and fascinated, and it was like a big deal. And I always want to be relevant to my kids. And I started looking into, what would it take to bridge over into filmed entertainment? And I started that journey back in 2005.
Wow. And now here you are, Big George Foreman, talking to Rick Altizer on the Faith-Filled Fan podcast. Remember when I came to your house, we did some interviews for my other show, the Rick Altizer Show? Do you remember that?
I do. Of course I remember that, yeah.
We sat in your living room. Sat in your dining room, and there's two great interviews with Rich. If you want to kind of get his background and how he transitioned from the music industry to the film industry, you can check the Rick Altizer Show and check our interviews. My 2 interviews with Rich Peluso on there. And we're talking about right now the movie Big George Foreman. It's going to be in theaters April 28th. I'm going to give it 2 big gloves up. Instead of thumbs, we'll do boxing gloves. And you can get information by going to biggeorgeforeman.movie. That's the new thing now, is .movie.
Yeah.
That's a new one, isn't it? I don't remember that just 2 years ago. Everybody's got .movie now.
Yeah, it's been a few years. There was a big expansion in the URL extension codes and movie and also TV. .tv and .movie seem to be very popular. Yeah,
so biggeorgeforeman.movie, and you can find out on a theater near you. It's going to be nationwide. It's going to be everywhere. How many theaters will it be in? Do you know?
Oh gosh, I don't know exactly. I think it's over 2,500. It might be closer to 3,000. Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's going to be everywhere. Wow. Yeah. Well, I hope it does great. I really do. It's so good, and it will be at a theater near you. It's a regular theatrical run, so it's not like a Fathom event where it's just in for one night. It's going to be in for the full run. And so starting April 28th, you can go see Big George Foreman. Rich, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been amazing. What a great interview. And while you're lazing and relaxing at the beach.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate your time as well.
And so now you're going to get inundated with calls to go have coffee.
Well, if and when I ever get back home, I've never traveled so much, but I'm definitely open for coffee hangs.
All right. Rich, I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have coffee one day.
All right. Take care, Rick.
God bless. If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.